All right, well, welcome to this webcast on how to build a high-impact, data-driven culture. This event is brought to you by Think Big, a Teradata company. My name is Paul Barsh. I'm a marketing director for Think Big, and I will be serving as your moderator today. Now, before we begin the presentation, let's go over a few housekeeping items. So the first one is, feel free to resize any of the windows that you see on the screen, including the presentation window, or move them around so you can best view the presentation. At the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a taskbar with icons. If you're unsure about what a specific icon does, hover over the icon with your mouse, and a box will pop up that will tell you the function of that icon. There's also some social buttons at the top of the screen, upper right, you'll see them there. They allow you to connect with Think Big on social media now and after the webcast, so check those out. There's also a chat feature located on the right hand of the screen. You can use the live chat feature to reach out to me, the moderator, during the webcast, or you can use the chat to connect with fellow attendees. This is a common question that a lot of webinars get is, can I get a copy of the slides? And the answer is yes. If you want a copy of the slides, they can be found in the handouts window, which is the paper icon at the bottom of the screen. You'll see it there. It looks like a little document. So check that out. This is also what I think one of the most important parts is you can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the webcast. So something that our presenter says that piques your interest or you have a question, ask it during the presentation through that Q&A button, and then we'll be able to grab those and moderate them. If you need technical assistance, please submit a question and you can open the Q&A panel to see the written response back to you. All right, it is my pleasure now to introduce our presenter for today. Our presenter is Ron Bodkin. He is the president of Think Big. Ron founded Think Big to help companies realize measurable value from big data. Think Big is the leading provider of independent consulting and integration services specifically focused on big data solutions. Previously, Ron was vice president of engineering at Quantcast, where he led the data science and engineering teams that pioneered the use of Hadoop and NoSQL for batch and real-time decision-making. Prior to that, Ron was founder of New Aspects, which provided enterprise consulting for aspect-oriented programming. Ron was also co-founder and CTO of B2B applications provider Seabridge, which he led to a team of 900 people and a successful IPO. Ron, thanks for being here today. The floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Paul. Well, it's a pleasure to have a chance to talk to everyone today about building data-driven cultures. Here at Think Big, we've been in business for almost 6 years and helping customers take advantage of big data right from early on when the concept of big data was new and we had to explain it, until more recently where we've helped customers in a range of industries really succeed, whether it be around understanding consumer behavior, connected products, risk, and other aspects of applying data. For today, what I'm going to take you through is a bit of an overview of big data, what it is and why it matters, how it fits into the broader context of becoming a data-driven culture. We'll talk about, in my experience in working with customers, what are some of the challenges that organizations face in becoming data-driven? And then I'll talk a little bit more about how one addresses those and can succeed in building a data-driven culture, with finally some specific examples from different industries and some takeaways. And then we'll leave time at the end to address any questions you have on the topics that come. So with that, let's start with what is key about big data? I mean, many of us have heard the definition, the 3 V's, or however many V's the person defining big data has, volume, variety, velocity, veracity, et cetera. But I think the thing that's really critical is big data is a movement and a capability that came about because the explosion of data and the complexity of data really started to tax traditional tools and techniques for managing data and analyzing it. So to me, what's critical in all of that is actually the variety, the complexity of the data, the desire to have data that's changing more quickly that we can work with in a fairly raw form and still get results and be more agile in the way we analyze and work with data. Right? So there's a range of these new kinds of data sets. It might include location data or social or consumer interaction and behavior across channels, sensors from connected products, logs from software on those products. There's a range of these types of data sets, and all of them are growing more quickly. But the most important thing, the thing that I think is really critical, is the fact that you've got this increasing diversity and variety in data that we have available and have the opportunity to leverage, which is really creates a new opportunity to become more data-driven and to use data is a more integral part of decision-making in the enterprise. Now, when you look at that, we can see that companies that are data-driven, that are leaders in becoming data-driven, have significant advantages. You know, the most data-driven companies are more than 20 times more successful at customer acquisition and more than 5 times better at retaining customers, as well as having significantly better profitability, over almost 20 times. Right? So the stakes are high if you can really achieve and become a data-driven company, a data-driven organization. These are examples of how much of an impact it has when you take a look at the performance of companies that have achieved objectives of being data-driven versus the broader peers that are not. Now, if you look at what does it mean to have a data-driven culture, you know, there's a few aspects to that. The most important one is fundamentally a belief and a trust that using data and analytics really drives results. How do you make decisions? How do you execute operations? It contrasts from what has been long the necessity prior to having data-driven culture, which is much more of an intuitive approach to making decisions. Sometimes, all too often, this is what gets called highest paid person's opinion, HIPPO decision making, right? Which is instead of really running tests and being objective and trying to understand what's going on, you have either the most senior executive involved in the decision makes an arbitrary decision, or the other one that's popular, the BOGSAT form of decision making. Bunch of guys sitting around talking, where instead of actually gathering the data and doing the analysis, you come to a consensus without the benefit of a lot of data. Clearly, data-driven has a lot of advantages, but as we all know, getting to managing the data, integrating it, and analyzing it is not a small undertaking. And typically what we see is companies' journey to a data-driven culture takes multiple steps. Starting from more traditional use of BI and data marts, more traditional kind of siloed and point uses of data, we see a lot of organizations moving towards big data by looking to scale their ability to work with data while containing cost in managing and analyzing data. But then it really gets interesting as organizations start to become more agile, start to be able to work with these new varieties of data and more quickly do analysis, understand new things, and bring data to bear on decisions, which then can lead to the next phase of business innovation, which is now about not only making good decisions, but also starting to leverage data and analytics in business processes, in things like making effective recommendations and personalization for consumers across channels, or predicting failures and responding proactively before they happen to improve your business process. So if Agile Analytics is about integrating better insight into decisions by using more data, business innovation is about becoming data-driven in the way your business processes execute. And then finally, organizational transformation through data. This is really about taking advantage of data and analytics to create new business models. This can include opportunities like monetizing data, selling valuable data about behavior to other markets, This can include creating value from data by integrating, for example, benchmarking and best practices to your customers so that you can help them understand how their usage, how their performance stacks up against their peers, to help use data to guide them on a more effective use of your products and services. It can mean unlocking whole new business models. For example, when Uber launched a new way of doing personal transportation, being able to use data to dynamically price was a key part of how they launched that service, as well as having new connectivity. Right, so this is a journey, and I think it's important because a lot of times when we work with customers, they're really excited about opportunities in category number 5. How do I change my industry? I've done a study, and management consultants have identified billions of dollars of value in the data that we have. And these are great goals, but it takes a journey. It takes steps to become more data-driven, to build the competency in the organization to be able to tackle and unlock some of this value. Now, if we look again at examples of how companies that are top performers are doing this, you can see things like in retail, customizing offers based on the propensity of consumers and social data, as well as available inventory in the consumer packaged goods arena. Or you can look at Royal Bank of Canada, driving effective data for direct marketing, which had over 10 times the average response rate, right? So by having the right messaging, the right tailoring of marketing messages, driving significant outcomes. And you look at Caesars Entertainment and their loyalty program, where they're able to integrate data and have $1 billion worth of value by having that really coherent data set understanding of their consumers, right? So there's a lot of opportunities to do this right. So what does it take to be data-driven? Well, the first thing is anyone who's working in analytics, especially in this day and age of rapid innovation and change, the evolution of open source and cloud and agile methodologies, knows is there's a lot to know and there's a lot of exciting developments. But to master it, it's not something that a single unicorn can do. You can't find one person you can't find many people, let's say, who are amazing at every aspect, and it's so critical to have a team. To being data-driven, it takes experts in the domain and the business problem who really understand the history and the context of your business and business processes. It takes experts in data management. Not only how do you integrate data and have access to it, but how do you take advantage of effective ways of governing and understanding data with these new big data technologies where, as we talked about, there's a lot more variety and you want to be more agile instead of organizing everything up front. How do you do the analysis, the data science, to uncover the new insights and new patterns? A big part of that is being really effective at figuring out what isn't working so you can focus your attention on the things that actually do add value, that do really contribute to the better decision making. And then there's a lot of technical capabilities that need to be there to be data-driven. You need to have software architecture and engineering skills to be able to build these systems and integrate them together with decision-making systems, with operational systems, systems of engagement to really be effective, as well as DevOps as a methodology for being able to make updates, to make changes, to more rapidly deploy and maintain high quality of systems in the context of execution. So we really believe that a critical part of success around being data-driven is forming high-functioning cross-functional teams that have a variety of capabilities working together, right? This doesn't happen by having silos where people are working on these functions fairly independently with occasional interactions or requirements documents flowing. You need to have close collaboration among the teams to really achieve results and to continuously refine and improve. So with that, let's talk a little bit more, though, about what are some of the challenges to becoming data-driven. What are the things, the obstacles that we see in organizations that prevent them from being successful at this? It's worth underscoring that there's some significant risk for organizations that are not successful, right? So there's a recent study around what happens when organizations are not successful at being data-driven, that 66% of those companies that are falling behind are losing market share, Almost a third of them have waning investor confidence, and over half of them are on the bottom rankings of competitiveness in their industry. This is highlighted by the fact that you've got, in again, the same survey, over 90% of enterprises have seen over the last 3 years new entrants into their industry that are using big data to drive data-driven decision-making as a key strategy for how they're going to succeed, right? So the use of data and analytics is becoming important in many industries. It's fascinating. Just last week, Stanford Business School announced a whole new course called The Industrialist Dilemma, talking about how these new techniques of using data in a digitally connected world is starting to radically change the dynamics, competitive dynamics in industries that have had until now not been nearly as dynamic and affected by the wave of digitization that had been affecting other industries like e-commerce and retail, like media, that had been affected much more quickly, right? So big data is really starting to change the game in industries, in manufacturing and logistics and in other industries that traditionally were not affected. And then, finally, Gartner identified that many Fortune 500 companies have failed to exploit big data for competitive advantage and continue to struggle, right? So the stakes are high. It's really important to get this right because there's a lot to gain, but time continues to move forward, and companies that aren't succeeding in this are going to have increasing pressure. This is a big reason why we see the mega trend of a lot of organizations bringing forward roles like a chief data officer, because they recognize how critical it is to manage data as an asset, to leverage it, and to become data-driven. So one of the things that we see a lot of organizations run into a trap is what I like to call the big data plateau, right? So doing something initial that is successful. Often it's an IT group that's doing something that's more technology focused, maybe containing costs, scaling something, a data warehouse that wasn't working well, and they don't get the business sponsorship. They don't really connect and build the relations so the business can identify the upside in using the data, and it gets stalled in adoption, right? It becomes limited, and they tap out and stop making investments and start leveraging the benefit, right? So we see a lot of organizations that face this challenge of the big data plateau. How do you do that? Well, there's challenges at every phase in being successful, right? There's challenges around how do you put the right strategy together, get the right buy-in, the right budget, have the right architecture for execution. There's challenges around how you implement, how you build this out. There's challenges around driving adoption. How do you get broader acceptance and use in the organization, which is absolutely critical. And there's challenges around analytics. How do you take advantage of this to really do the right analysis on these interesting data sets so that you can being data-driven, you get good outcomes. Let's unpack these and talk about some of the challenges. In terms of strategy and architecture, if you're not going in the right place, it's hard to get there, right? So picking the right starting point is critical, right? A lot of organizations we see, if they don't have the plateau problem where they aim too low and don't have enough ambition around what to achieve, the other thing we see that can be a real problem is more going the other extreme of trying to boil the ocean, and the first endeavor is something that's too ambitious, that's a bridge too far, and there isn't enough backing and support to get there, right? So picking something that's an incremental place where you can get some low-hanging fruit, get some wins, build some confidence is critical, rather than aiming too small or aiming too high. Another challenge we see is siloing, right? So we see a lot of times there's been a lot of emphasis on driving analytics into individual functions and not understanding the power of integration of data and a more holistic capability, right? So it's very hard to succeed at being data-driven if every analytics undertaking is a siloed point initiative that has no connectivity, there's no collaboration among groups. So that becomes a common challenge, is that, this is exacerbated because in many organizations there hasn't been as effective a partnership for driving new capabilities between business units and the IT group. And yet breaking down those silos and maintaining the right capabilities, integrated data is critical And then finally, technology selection. Having the right architecture based on patterns of what really works in practice, using the right technologies for the right purpose, not buying into hype around all the new technologies around what they might do someday, but making sure to use them for what they're good at now is critical, and it has to be lined up against capabilities. A common challenge we see is people get excited by the shiny new thing like, hey, we're really excited about building streaming architectures for real-time decision making. If you're in the phase of business innovation, real-time response to events is an important capability in the architecture. But if you're trying to do agile analytics, in most organizations, being able to respond to events within 15 minutes or an hour of them occurring is incredible progress versus so many companies that can't make decisions without a multi-week project to get data together. Right, so it's about technology selection, the right priorities, and using things effectively. Right, so those are the strategy and architecture, going in the right direction, building the business case to get the funding and support, getting the right buy-in, and picking the right technologies. So that's the first set of challenges we see organizations face. At the next stage, in implementation failure, one of the biggest challenges we see is a lot of organizations approach these projects around analytics and data management in a business-as-usual manner. What that means is basically taking a very much of a waterfall approach of trying to identify everything that needs to get done in a long cycle and then have a long delivery time before delivering anything useful. This is generally a bad practice, a waterfall approach with long cycles versus agile iterative, even in a space where the requirements are much better understood, the best practices are out there. In a space like all the innovation we're seeing around using data, around changing organizational culture to be more data-driven, it's really critical to have short cycles and feedback to test and learn, so agile becomes critical. But it's not easy. Many organizations aren't used to agile, don't have a lot of capability, and struggle, especially with some of the tacit requirements like being able to accept delivery of something smaller that's less complete, and to be able to have a collaboration to iterate and get feedback to add the capabilities that are needed. Another key challenge we see around implementation failure is simply having the right skills. The skills around how to use all the great new data management technologies, the skills around how to do data science and how to do advanced analytics, and oftentimes even just using modern BI and search tools as more basic forms of analytics. There's a lot of gaps, and we see a lot of organizations struggle with having the right skills and capabilities as well as the right methodology for delivery. So those are other challenges we see. In terms of adoption, one of the things that's absolutely critical is having the right executive sponsorship, right, to say this is an initiative that needs care and feeding, that it's visibility in the enterprise. I mean, if becoming data-driven is not a key initiative of leadership in an organization, it's very difficult to overcome all these challenges, to have the sponsorship and the staying power to stick with it and to make it happen. Right, so executive sponsorship is a key thing. If it's not there, it becomes a tremendous challenge. Another one is getting business ownership, right? So these projects, these data projects, these analytics projects require breaking down silos and collaboration between IT and the business. But ultimately, the business has to own becoming data-driven. It's the business that benefits, the general manager of business, the chief marketing officer, the head of customer service. These are owners in an organization who really derive the benefits from becoming data-driven and have to ultimately sign up, take accountability for metrics, and sponsor it in their organization as a priority. That ties to having the right kind of change management, right? It's not enough to have a technical capability. You've got to get buy-in. You've got to change the behavior of people to use it to become data-driven and to change the way people perform business, change the culture, change the thinking. That takes a lot of change management. That takes a lot of adjustment in how the business operates. Finally, in terms of analytics challenges, one of the biggest challenges we see is in so many organizations, anytime somebody wants to do a new analysis or understand something that isn't down the fairway, isn't a standard form of analysis, it can take months to start or make changes, to incorporate new data, to do a new analysis. And in a context where it takes weeks and months to kind of work your way through a backlog of work from a service provider, people don't have time, and instead of becoming data-driven, they make the best judgment they can based on the available information, which is often quite limited, right? So that forces people to make decisions in the absence of data. So that's a big challenge we see a lot of organizations struggling with, is how do you shorten that cycle time to be able to be more nimble and agile in being able to incorporate data, use data to do new analysis. Another challenge is because of that, a lot of times you'll see rogue deployment of separate systems, data marts, cloud, environments being spun up. Now that's being done to respond to try to say how to become data-driven, but the challenge becomes by having it done in a silo, it's often not linked in with the rest of the data. It's often challenging to have it be accurate and consistent, right? And it's hard to be data-driven when you've got different ways of calculating the same metrics and driving to the same answer. You end up with a data-informed debate where different stakeholders have different perspective because they're working off different data. It's very hard to come to agreement and really be data-driven when you can't verify the accuracy and consistency. And then the last one we see is organizations that have the notion of a sandbox or a lab environment for doing analytics, that they know how to create a sandbox, which is already progress, right, in a bit more of a controlled environment, but it's often very hard to go from those initial experiments to them to become in production. You get back into this long queue for deployment to production. And, you see too often that these test environments, these experimental environments, effectively become production. They become pseudo-production without the guarantee, service level agreement, and right stewardship for use by a broader audience. Right? So these are some of the challenges we see in doing analytics that a lot of enterprises are facing. So these are some of the things that we see as challenges. Well, how do you respond? Right? How do you overcome these? How can you build a data-driven culture? Here are some of the key things that we're seeing work in the market. First of all, creating a big picture, right? So what are the phases that you have to go through? Well, to start with, you have to get that leadership buy-in, right? Get the C-suite bought in, get the sponsorship, get budget assigned to really go after this in a serious way and say this is a priority and a commitment, because it doesn't happen without it really being a priority and making investment. The next stage then is to brainstorm the art of the possible and to really think a little bit outside the box. What are the best practices that are possible? What are other leaders doing? What are others in our industry, our customers, our suppliers, our competitors? What can happen? What are the things we've always wanted to do with data and always felt were not possible? With the idea not of doing it all at once, right, and not boiling the ocean, but thinking through a roadmap of what are the stages and the possibilities over the medium term. That then leads to how do you prioritize a key first initiative and create a minimum viable product. Get something built. Get it into the hands of the organization. We'll talk about how do you get the best team and the best way to get off to a good start in a minute here, but that concept of minimum viable product of just enough functionality and capability to really start to deliver value and start to show is critical. That then leads to an agile approach of iterating quickly, changing, adding capabilities, responding, learning, and scaling out, broadening adoption from early pilot users to a broader group to really advance that first project, as well as then leading to a roadmap build out of doing more agile products and broadening the portfolio, tackling some more ambitious things, taking advantage of some smaller wins that wouldn't justify building out a platform, but now you've got a capability in place you can leverage, right? So this is overall the broad picture of what we've seen and helped customers succeed from concept through to scale deployment of becoming data-driven. within that, some of the key things, one is a focus on learning. So rather than focusing on how to drive ROI from analytics in year one, it's about driving key performance indicators to show you're on track towards becoming data-driven. Most organizations that need to show an ROI will achieve some ROI by reducing cost, for example, offloading expensive ETL processing to a lower cost environment, or reducing storage costs or other places, right? So many times we do see companies building ROI business cases to justify some of the costs of building platforms, but in terms of really driving the benefit, the top line results of becoming data-driven and making better business decisions, better outcomes in the business, really that has to be measured more in terms of key performance indicators. So you're probably not going to, in the first year, get a positive ROI on that aspect of this, but what you will do is see, are you driving adoption? Are you getting more usage? Is it sustained and increasing? Are you getting faster results in driving new analytics? Do you have more and more diverse and larger amounts of data available? Are you seeing people promoting experiments into production? Do you have a thriving community where ideas are being shared and people are leveraging? Do you have anecdotes to show that these new capabilities are changing the way people are making decisions and learning? Are you changing the time to collect and analyze new data sets? Right, with the idea that over the long term, the power of 1% is great. If you can, for example, GE noted if 1% savings in fuel costs in commercial aviation could generate $30 billion of savings over 15 years. And we see this in many large enterprises. A 1% improvement in customer retention, a 1% improvement in profitability in offers, a 1% improvement in reliability in products that are deployed in the field can generate massive, massive returns, right? So the stakes are high, but it takes tracking to show you're on track to changing the culture in order to get there and in order to unlock those benefits. Another key thing is you execute, especially in the early days, it's about putting together a cross-functional Tiger team, getting the right talent together with different backgrounds, the right business sponsorship, the right architect, the right data scientists, the business experts and analysts, right, DevOps skills, all working together to create that minimum viable product and iterate it for success. A big part of this is really stacking the deck, getting the very best talent in the organization. That doesn't necessarily mean people that are deep experts in new technologies. You can bring in outside help. You can do training. There's a lot of things you can do to supplement maybe some of those skills gaps to bring in the right capabilities. But having top talent that are very capable and that are also going to therefore be very influential in taking and evangelizing the results of that first success is critical, right? So you want to really get the best talent and put them together to drive an outcome of measurable success to show the organization it's possible. It's unbelievable the difference when you see in an organization who've had this first success, the excitement level that we've been able to execute quickly on a data project and start to show analytics value. And then you start to see a lot more buy-in and belief, right? You get a lot more innovators in the organization coming forward and wanting to play because they believe it's now possible, right? So that Tiger team becomes incredibly important in overcoming the barriers we talked about earlier. To do that, of course, they need to have a good data-driven project, which has the characteristics that it's something that's a visible problem where you've got ability to, significant impact and yet at the same time tractable. You can start to make progress, start to have some real benefits. And of course, it's got to have not just a Tiger team, but the sponsorship and buy-in to contribute the data, to be a good partner, and to make it a priority to make it succeed and measure the results. Some of the examples of that, kinds of projects it could be. This could be things like driving more measurability around sales and predictability around sales success. This could mean driving more effective cross-channel marketing in retail to understand consumer behavior in mobile, through email promotions, through website, through call center, or in store, in person. And in manufacturing, this could be improving time to market and yield optimization. So being able to try out using, integrating data, being able to find data, be able to do larger scale analytics on deeper data around manufacturing. All of these are examples of some of the kinds of pilots we've seen be successful for companies in driving to a more data-driven approach. Another key thing that we see is there is a divide, and a lot of organizations are what we like to call data haves, meaning they have access to rich big data. They have data around consumer behavior or connected product behavior, but some companies are not. Some companies are have-nots in the sense that maybe they are a B2B organization and consumer data, the data from their consumers is available to their customers or their customers' customers, but not to them. That could be a consumer packaged goods company that the retailers that sell their products have rich data about consumer buying and interests, but they themselves have only high-level summaries and panel information. Or that could be, for example, organizations that have downstream partners, logistics or integrator partners for products, and they're providing parts. And again, they don't have access to data about the usage and the behavior of those parts. Instead, it's the downstream assembler of their parts or components, right? So there's different strategies, right? Those who are already data haves have the opportunity to leverage the data to invest in these capabilities and create competitive advantage, even build business value by selling products, by monetizing indirectly the value of their data. Those who are data have-nots, there is still opportunity to leverage data, but there's also a lot to be said in terms of how can you get more data, right? Can you collect data? Can you build partnerships with suppliers to attract data? Can you do acquisitions and find additional capabilities to add data in through IoT and third-party data feeds? Can you become more of a data have and integrate data acquisition in as part of the corporate strategy, right? So those are some of the opportunities for those who are more data have-nots. Another key thing is very much as you execute and as you build a success, fostering a culture of entrepreneurship around analytics, empowering the business to do their own analytics, to have more access to analytics, to have capability to do more advanced analytics, to make it easy to move from an experiment to strategic result, right? I mean, one of the big things is in organizations that have real limited capacity, they have long queues and limited access to take in new data and limited resources for doing analytics, you tend to have a culture where people that are effective at convincing others can get those scarce resources. But in an entrepreneurial culture, there's broad access, and so anyone who wants to do analytics to test an idea or innovate or improve can get access to it with relatively low barriers, and it really lets more ideas flourish and changes the culture of the company to being data-driven, right? And that moving quickly from experiment to strategic plan does mean making it easy so when those experiments work, they get promoted and become new capabilities, part of the core way the business is done, or things that didn't work out get eliminated. In a culture where you try a lot of things and the more effective you are doing analytics, the more often you find that new ideas, new insights are already captured by what you were already doing, right? It's not that you reach diminishing returns, but that's okay. That's part of building a successful analytics culture. And as scaling this, it's important to have a center of excellence around big data and a center of excellence around analytics, right? So having a strategy, having buy-in across the different business units as well as IT, how do you govern and manage the data? How do you where do you make investments? How do you provide support? How do you foster community? How do you measure the success? All of these are things that a center of excellence can do, and it's important if it's a goal for the organization to become more data-driven, to really leverage analytics, to have this structure in place. We've seen a lot of different ways that this works, but having a explicit investment and a buy-in for a center of excellence is an important part of succeeding. So with that, let me segue over to a few examples of success that we've seen and some takeaways. So an example, high-tech, one of our customers is a high-tech manufacturer. We've been working with them for well over 2 years now. In this case, one of the key things that they wanted to do was improve yield, make it so that when they were developing new products, testing them, and manufacturing them, they more quickly figured out how to get a high percentage of their products meeting spec, working well, right? That accelerates time to market. The sooner you can get to predictability around this new product works really well, the sooner you can sell it at scale. It also reduces cost, of wasted scrap materials that were destroyed by building something that didn't work, as well as driving up customer satisfaction by having higher quality products in the hands of consumers that ultimately can help win market share. To do this, there's a big opportunity to make it easier to both get access to all the data sets, to look deeper and do proactive analytics across larger amounts of data, larger runs over deeper history. And so the way we executed was putting a great strategy together. We piloted around a subset of the data in a single product line, and then with an evolution, a rapid release of new functionality every 8 to 12 weeks, executed iterations to test and learn. This was in close collaboration with users across the different groups, R&D, QA, manufacturing operations, customer service, and has continued to lead to now collaborations with partners, the downstream suppliers, to provide more feedback from behavior in the field and collaborate around problem solving, and with upstream suppliers and their components to provide deeper data and integration to really understand both the DNA of these products as well as their living data of how they perform in the field. Right? This success with users has led to both ongoing input, new requirements, new capabilities, new ways of doing analysis. It's great when we'd see engineers that would painstakingly do studies by hand and spend a day analyzing 2 devices, suddenly being able to, in a hackathon, working with us, prototype analyzing hundreds of devices at the push of a button. That then led to new requirements of how do you automate that and make that a more straightforward, simple thing to include in processes going forward. Right, so this is one customer of ours, a great example of how an organization that was very much not data-driven, had a lot of challenges in access to data, and siloed point analytics, was able to build a platform and drive a much more proactive, data-driven manner of analytics. In another industry, leading financial asset manager, the opportunity was much more around understanding consumer behavior. Right, understanding consumers' behavior as they would call into a call center, interact on a website, interact in a mobile environment, respond to ads, right? So to enable offers that were better, to understand the value of customers, to improve customer experience, and to reduce fraud and cost of support. This was a journey of modernizing, integrating into a data lake the data sets, then being able to drive data science to have deeper understanding. Things like when a consumer had interacted with some sections and certain patterns of different phases in a visit on the website, that would then inform how the call center agent would say, this is obviously a person who's trying to find this and is struggling, so let me make sure I address that concern, right? So that had a big impact on support and customer satisfaction. And this is also really important because by having this platform and this collaboration, you had a real difference in the way IT and the business unit responsible for the consumer interactions worked, right? So they came together around data science and worked through who did what were their responsibilities. There was a lot of differences of opinion, right? So this wasn't kumbaya, everyone just had a immediate agreement, but by working through the details of how to collaborate, the end result was a much more effective analytics-driven environment. So I do think it's worth noting it's important to have some balance between being data-driven, analytics-driven, and having intuition and domain knowledge. Almost every company that we interact with in the Fortune 500 are very intuitive and have value in becoming more data and analytics-driven. There's the occasional company, mostly digital giants that are new companies that are extremely data-driven and sometimes are so data-driven that they have gone too far to the right. But there's a lot of value in most organizations becoming more data and analytics-driven. But I note this because I think there is a sweet spot of combining these two. Another key thing, again, is breaking down silos. Instead of investing in one more analytics silo, one more point way of doing analysis, getting leaders in the business, marketing leaders, GMs, to understand the value of integrating data and having a more holistic understanding of their business is really critical, right? To knock down silos and to collaborate across business units, to have rules of engagement so you can trust how data is going to be used and then leverage the benefit of integrating that data. Likewise, a key thing is embracing digital natives, right? So attracting talent, right? There's the next wave of, millennials and recent graduates from college are digital natives. They've grown up in a world of digital connectivity. There's a lot more interest and desire to do data science, to leverage math and computers. And so there's a lot of opportunity to welcome some of this talent in and to train them and to bring them up to speed to help change the culture, as well as training and skilling and ramping up more experienced people that have a lot to offer as well. And then finally, again, the importance of driving big data and analytics, becoming data-driven as a top priority in the organization is significant, right? Organizations that have C-suite support are showing the biggest gains, and it's interesting to see that that Asia Pacific is really the leader in having this. But you can see that in all regions, there's a significant emphasis, almost 50% in North America and well over 50% in Asia, over 50% in Western Europe, of organizations where big data is a top 5 issue for the C-suite. And that kind of commitment and buy-in is really critical to make the necessary change to really leverage the opportunity here. So with that, appreciate you taking the time to listen to my prepared remarks, and I'll turn it over to Paul to go through some of the questions that have come in from the audience.
All right. Well, thanks for a great presentation, Ron. Giving the audience a lot to think about. So as a reminder, to ask a question through the Q&A panel, please go to the Q&A panel, submit your question, and then hit the submit button. All right, Ron, there's been some questions that have come in during the talk, and I think this is a good one here. Getting back to your comment about the KPIs versus ROI and focusing on KPIs first versus ROI first out, the question is, my CFO is expecting a positive ROI in year 1, otherwise he won't sponsor the project. If we focus on KPIs, how do I meet this requirement?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think there's a couple of angles to this. One is what we typically see is many organizations that require an ROI in year 1 have a prime the pump strategy of build out a platform and some basic capabilities for data management, build out a data lake based on business value that can be realized by reducing cost, by delaying purchase of maybe the next ETL server, the next data warehouse server, building the next data mart, and reducing the cost of archival storage by putting it into a new platform, which then also sets the stage for using that data lake platform for doing more analytics, right? So that's a common strategy many organizations are using, is to get some initial wins by reducing some costs, but with the strategy of building that capability to then enable upside. But the other side that's just as important is to really have that roadmap, that discussion with the business to the key leaders in different parts of the business who benefit from analytics, and talk about how this capability will enable their success, right? And so basically, a lot of times when you look at it and you say, well, adding these analytics capabilities could have a meaningful outcome in terms of a business objective that has ROI associated, and so getting some of that allocated, some of that budget allocated to support an initiative is also a strategy we're seeing be very successful.
Yeah, I saw that at the end of the slide that talked about the C-level leadership taking the charge with big data, especially in Asia Pacific. So the question is, what's the best way to get C-level leadership to sponsor a big data project?
Well, there's a couple of different approaches. I mean, one is certainly there's a lot of opportunity now for C-suite leaders to hear more about what's happening with the use of data analytics, to see the success cases, to see investments that their peers and so forth are having. So there's a lot of educational material, and it's really valuable for the CEO and their leadership team, as well as the board of enterprises, to be informed and aware of these trends, right? To build the case, to understand the impact, to see the case studies. Another thing that we see organizations doing is coming at it the other way by showing some results, by getting an initial project going, by showing some results, and then making the case for, hey, let's build on this success. Here's something we've done. How can we scale this success and do something more? Right, so it's those combinations of education, of making sure that it's included in the strategy, as well as demonstrating success and building on that success.
All right, I like this question because it's going to challenge you a little bit. It says here, open source is changing so much. When you said 2 to 3 year roadmap sounds like a lot of time, shouldn't it be more like a 12-month roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there is certainly a rapid pace of change in the technologies available, and open source creates always a lot of innovation, a lot of new projects, new capabilities. But I think it's really important that the most important element of a roadmap is not about what is the specific component, the specific version of something, what's being released now. It's about the capabilities, and most organizations are at a stage in their journey where there's a lot of mature technology that can get them a long way, and it's only as they get into the most advanced use cases, things like massive scale, real-time streaming and decision-making, where there's a lot more sensitivity to rapid changes in the market, right, and new technology, new capabilities moving very quickly, right? So having a roadmap around what you want to do, what are the priorities, and then an architecture that talks more about what are the key capabilities, resting as best as possible on well-established standards, is the way to go. So you want to have a plan for the longer term, but as the old expression goes, plans are valueless, but planning is invaluable. It is true that it's unlikely that if you put together a 3-year roadmap, you're not going to execute it faithfully, right? You're going to change and learn and adjust throughout that 3 years. But having a North Star, having a direction, knowing what you're going to work on later, you don't have to focus on what you must work on and get right now, is super important, right? So that's why having a longer-term plan is really valuable, even though you absolutely are going to have more detail around the next year.
All right, well, the next question is on sandboxes, and I think you talked a little bit about this, Ron, but the question is, why do you want to eliminate sandboxes, especially when cloud storage is so cheap?
Well, the real reason for eliminating sandboxes is not storage costs. It's about making sure that when you have a clear path to go from a good idea to production, that you make it so that as people have new ways of doing analysis that are more effective, that they get shared with their colleagues, that they become the standard, and that you have the right balance of curation and control, so you have governance, new ways of looking at data are vetted and bought in, right? So the sandboxes that linger tend to represent a kind of limbo of people having some good ideas but not being able to get consensus and buy-in how to move forward and how to make it a standard for how to operate. In order to be data-driven, you have to have consistency and standards, right? So you have to have a process for improving, not just as an individual doing a good analysis, but as a group.
All right. Well, if you have a question, just a reminder to ask it through the Q&A panel, and I'll allow for that. And in the meantime, there is one more question in the queue. And it says here, getting my business users engaged with my big data project is hard. How do I get them to come to the table and participate?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think what we've seen is, that it takes some combination of having innovative people in the business that want to learn new ideas. Sometimes it's bringing in outside parties that have case studies and stories and experience who can engage the business and captivate their interest. It's a lot of times we also see being able to do something, even a grassroots effort of doing something to prototype and demonstrate value to get interest, right? So, it ultimately takes spending time. The other big thing is just listening, right? Spending more time with the business users and talking to them about what they're trying to do and what's important to them, becomes incredibly important, right? That in order to make it relevant, you have to understand what's important to somebody else.
All right. Well, I think that is it for our questions and answers, so we'll close. This concludes our webcast today. Ron, thank you for presenting. As you exit today's webcast, please take a couple minutes. A survey is going to pop up, so take a couple minutes to complete that. That will provide us some feedback. And of course, please follow us on social media. We are on Facebook. We're on Twitter and LinkedIn. LinkedIn, we post all kinds of great positions, so take a look at that. And we definitely appreciate your time today, and we hope you found this webcast to be a valuable experience.
Thank you, everybody.